Thanks everyone who's attending and watching this. My talk is called Designing the Best DEX Experience. And my name is Chris Kalani. I'm Director of Design at 0x. So just to set expectations, this isn't really going to be like a tutorial for how to design an exchange or really a talk about sort of the challenges of designing for Ethereum. There's actually a lot of those out there. But instead, I'm going to sort of share the process that we used to identify opportunities and share some of the rationale behind the product design decisions that we made while building Matcha. And so just to kind of get everyone on the same page, Matcha is the first user-facing product from 0x. And if you're not familiar with 0x, we're a decentralized exchange protocol. And we've traditionally spent our time helping developers and building infrastructure for people to build exchanges and dApps that require exchange-like functionality. And so Matcha is the first time that we're going to build our own consumer-facing product on top of 0x. And just to give you kind of an idea, just so you have a picture of what Matcha looks like, I'm not going to go into any of the details, but that will come later. But just so you kind of have an idea, this is the Matcha homepage. And then this is what our asset pages look like. And so, hopefully that doesn't look like every other DEX that you've seen. There's a lot of kind of cool ideas that we have put into this. And so that's what this talk is going to be about. I really want to kind of walk you through the process that we took from sort of getting like this sort of business objective, the process that we kind of went through to then figure out, okay, well, what do people actually want? What can we actually build and deliver to the market? And so starting with sort of the business objective, our company identified a while ago that we really needed our own retail product. And so there's a lot of reasons why. A few of them are just, it's sort of important that we are able to grow and own retail trading demand. We can either wait for an external developer to come along and do so, or we can do it ourselves. And it's important that there's retail demand because it makes market makers more profitable, makes it a more interesting place to market make, makes it a more interesting place for a developer to build on top of if there's actually usage on the protocol. We also wanted the ability to enable access to new markets as they came up and not sort of wait for someone else to do so. And then we really wanted to tighten our feedback loops. It's really sort of difficult when you're designing something, waiting for someone to implement it, and then trying to get feedback from users when that relationship sort of exists between the product building on top of us and their audience. So this really tightens up those feedback loops and allows us to build better things and iterate more quickly. And then really every protocol that exists has sort of their flagship product, and we didn't really have one. And so this is sort of the reasoning behind wanting to build our own retail product. And so that's awesome, and it makes a lot of sense. I feel like often, especially in crypto, we kind of take like a business objective, or we take a cool piece of technology and then we just go for it. But we really wanted to kind of take a step back and just sort of ask ourselves, there's a lot of DEXs out there, some of them really great. Why will people really care about another DEX? So we really want to set ourselves up for success. And so we started asking ourselves these questions, what's actually missing in the market? Where can we uniquely innovate? What are the major pain points that currently exist? And then given that we are able to build this great product, how can we actually convince people to switch and to use this? And so what did we learn? So I'm just going to kind of fast forward through the parts of our process. We essentially interviewed a lot of DEX traders, DeFi users. We did user research, looked at our competitors, and did a lot of design exploration. So here's some of the things that we learned. So in talking to users, we wanted to identify why are people using DEXs and why are people not using DEXs. And so some of the things that we found that were interesting is that there's unique, interesting assets on DEXs that centralized exchanges don't really have. It's like an interesting thing to lean into. Typically lower fees. There's no KYC and there's no accounts, so it's a little bit more inclusive. Anyone can kind of join and enter and exit as they want. And then similarly, there's more control through self custody. Um, and then, across the board, even people that are, I would call, Uniswap power users, people that trade often, is that, everyone pretty much said that there's a steep learning curve, especially to try a new DEX. They're kind of hard to use. A lot of them kind of can seem a little bit scary or shady. People are scared that they might do the wrong thing and lose money. And then sort of the perception is that DEXs typically have worse prices and less liquidity, and that they're slow. And so when looking at what exists on the market today, it was pretty clear that DEXs are still way too complicated. Here's a couple of screenshots of two of the most popular DEX aggregators. So DEX aggregators, it works similar to Matcha, where we actually go out and source liquidity from all the different protocols to give you better prices. And these products at the end of the day are providing a great service, but they're pretty clunky. They're hard to use. They're a bit intimidating. There's a lot of kind of inputs and switches and stuff that's confusing for most people. And then also we found that like DEXs often still come across as toys or experiments. It's not really clear if this is, one person kind of, hacking on something interesting, or, if this is a company or if this thing's going to be around or hacked. And so we really thought that there was like an opportunity to kind of build like a more cohesive brand and professional sort of presentation. And then, looking at Uniswap. So Uniswap is actually really well designed and it's super simple. But at the end of the day, it was kind of designed to be an agnostic open source UI for any type of liquidity to be served through. And one of the weaknesses that I think it has is that it assumes that users like already know what a wallet is, already knows what slippage is, what assets they want to trade. There's very little being done to sort of educate or to onboard or to provide any insight into what it is that you're actually trading. And so really a lot of work ends up needing to be done off site in order for a person to kind of be comfortable trading and to kind of be, an expert in trading on a DEX. And sort of given that, I think if you look at actual DEX retail usage, it's still really tiny. I think we often get pretty hung up on, like thinking about when crypto would become mainstream, but there's actually a lot of sort of users in other groups within crypto and within Ethereum that we can still go after. These numbers might be a little bit stale, but there's roughly 20,000 monthly active DEX users. DeFi, I think, sees between like 60 and 75,000. And then if you just look at Ethereum and MetaMask users, we now have hundreds of thousands of people. And so, how we position ourselves, we should really be setting ourselves up to go after a broader audience instead of just continuing to design for the same set of DeFi enthusiasts. And then, if you look at sort of even a centralized exchange, even just one of them, they have tens of millions of users. So that's a lot of people that are not brand new to crypto, but could be moved over to DEXs. So, once we went through that process, we asked ourselves, so how do we actually innovate here? So first thing is brand. Most of our competitors haven't really invested in building a brand or a voice, especially for consumers. They've remained very technical. So we don't want to just be an open source UI or a side project. We really want to build a brand that has longevity and that people trust. And then, we have this idea of like letting the assets shine. So most exchanges don't treat assets like valuable, interesting investments. There's not really any data. There's no descriptions. There's no context. And then, speed, reliability, and usability. So, most DEXs have really poor performance just from a very basic sort of website performance standpoint. And we really think there's a lot of work that can be done there. And then finally, streamlining existing workflows is something that we spend a lot of time looking into. So how are people actually trading, and where are the snags that people sort of have, and like how can we make those workflows a lot better for people? And then finally, we really should be building this DEX for the next 100,000 users, not for the 10,000 people that are already swapping tokens on our competitors. So going into the brand, so Matcha, it doesn't sound super technical, and it doesn't sound super it doesn't sound like your typical crypto product. And so some of the values that we wanted to bake into the brand all the way down to the product is that, we wanted to be more trendy. We wanted to be more comforting and simple. And when you compare us to other DEXs, they're often quite cold. They're a little bit scary. They are very complicated and very technical, and they're kind of trying to appeal to a very specific audience. So we really wanted to set ourselves apart there. And so diving into each of those, being trendy, I touched on this a second ago, but, trying to appeal to a larger audience was important to us. We want to be much more comforting, from our visual design to our language. We don't want people to feel like they're about to do the wrong thing. So we really want to use friendly language, notify a user when they're about to do something that may be disastrous, and really sort of be a trusted voice and a piece of education throughout the product. And then just generally, we want everything to be simple. We didn't really want to every product has sort of swap in their name or DEX, and we really wanted to just kind of simplify and not kind of hide. We don't really want to hide behind all this technical, complicated lingo. And so that's sort of some of the thinking that went into just naming Matcha, and what has sort of guided our visual design and product design. And so going back to this idea of letting the assets shine. So we believe that assets should be more than just a list item. If you look at any other DEX that exists, the only way you're really ever interacting with an asset is through some sort of search menu or drop down. And at the end of the day, these are the products that we're selling, and these are the things that people are investing their money into. And so we believe that we should really elevate these assets and make the whole product about these things that people are trading. And so on Matcha, we actually invested time in designing really nice 3D icons and providing data into these assets, and giving ways that people can kind of discover and learn more about them. So we have these asset pages that allows you to kind of look at the data, learn a little bit more about the asset, see what you can trade it with. And so we think that this is a kind of a pretty cool opportunity for us to kind of onboard more people, and also get people interested in new assets that exist on DEXs that they may not have heard about. And so from a speed and reliability standpoint, like I said, just basic web performance, and we think that the competitive edge for most centralized products and exchanges is speed and reliability, and dApps should be really no different. And so this is just kind of a quick example. Matcha takes about 2.5 seconds for you to fully be able to interact with it. And whereas 1inch, often locks up for 15 seconds plus. We just think that this is just kind of unacceptable in sort of the world that we live in today. And this isn't even blockchain related. It's really just some basic web performance. And so to dive in a little bit more about what we mean by building for the next 100,000 plus users, the areas that we're going to continue investing in is education, just making sure users feel smart. We want to provide a path forward through onboarding. If someone lands on Matcha and they don't have a wallet or they don't have ETH, we should provide them a path forward for learning how to do that, or fulfilling that action that they're trying to take, and not offload that onto some other product somewhere else. There's significant drop off when that happens, and we can't really control sort of the narrative. And then just generally simplifying everything. Really, where we can, let's hide the rough edges of Ethereum so that people don't have to sort of worry about that, or to need to learn too much about some of those things that should really just be behind the scenes. And then finally, we really want to emulate more centralized exchange design patterns. Instead of just going and looking at what other DEXs are doing, let's copy patterns that have been successful at onboarding tens of millions of people versus just tens of thousands. And so now I would like to actually give you a quick demo, a live demo of Matcha. So right now we're in beta. And we are planning on launching at the end of the month. So I just want to show you a few cool things that I think are unique to Matcha. So on the homepage, you'll first realize that, or notice that we kind of bubble these assets up top. So these are things that we think people want to trade. They're the most popular markets. And when you click on one of these, they take you to this nice asset page, which we can kind of do really nice things with SEO on. We can work with token projects to kind of build out over time, and really just kind of provide a nice homepage for these assets to be traded. So over on the right-hand side, you see more of a sort of traditional UI that you would expect. And you can kind of get into this trade, very similar to anything you've seen before. But a really cool thing that we decided to do differently that you'll notice starting at the homepage is we don't sort of have that classic, two input, two drop down menu for you to build your order. You can actually just use search to navigate directly to whatever asset you want. So if I want to go look at 0x or jump into a ZRX market, I can actually do that really quickly. So instead of tons of clicks and typing, I can actually just jump into a market directly by typing in the two tokens that I want to trade, hitting enter, and now I'm on that market page with everything kind of configured. And so we think this is a pretty cool, and it remains to be seen if this is an improvement, but we believe that this is a new improvement. And as we add hundreds or even thousands of tokens and markets, we want people to be able to access those and find them really easily instead of having to just dig through sort of these little pop-up menus. And so before I make a trade, finally the explore page. So we're going to build this out over time, but for right now, you can really quickly see all the assets that we list. You can sort by top movers in the past 24 hours, alphabetically, volume, and we can really start building this out over time as we start to add more assets. So let's say I'm going to go trade USDC and DAI. So I've already connected Coinbase wallet, so I'm going to use this as my example. Going to fill in. I'm going to buy 10 DAI for 10 USDC. Here we provide transparency into the fee. We're actually using meta transactions on this, so this fee is completely covered by Matcha. Okay, just signed on my iPhone. And we really wanted to let users know what's going on. So we do our best to sort of estimate, where this transaction is at in the process, how much time is left. I think too often DEXs kind of just leave a user sitting there waiting and wondering what's going on. And so that trade's already done, and you can confirm it on Etherscan. And then one other thing that we're in the kind of process of overhauling, but we also are wanting to provide more insight into sort of your trades and your balances. So we do have an account view, which is kind of unique to DEXs. They don't typically offer this. And so we really want you to sort of have insight into what you're holding, so you don't always have to kind of jump between your wallet and the DEX, and we can kind of provide more of a cohesive experience there. So yeah, that's everything I have. I'm going to open it up to questions, and yeah, we're really excited to show this to you guys. And like I said, the verdict's out on whether or not all of these decisions are going to be better than what exists. But I think what's important is that we really dug into what people were wanting, looked at kind of what was lacking, and used design as our sort of competitive edge to try something new. And so we're really excited to see sort of what you guys think of it.